Hello everyone, welcome into another video. Today we're talking all about UV mapping, and I'm going to use this video as kind of an intro if you've never worked with UVs before, or if you're still very new to modeling and still trying to kind of wrap your head around UV mapping. You can use this. This is also kind of a continuation of a series that I've been doing for this interior modular hallway. So if you've been following along with that, then we are going to unwrap all of these models that we have created, but I'm also going to just cover the absolute basics of UV mapping. So if you are just looking for how to work with UV mapping and haven't done any of these models or anything like that, that's perfectly fine. I'm going to cover just very, very basic models. But then we're also going to unwrap and UV map all of these models that we have created. So depending on where you are, you can jump around. I'll leave timestamps with everything. But first of all, I'm going to just try and cover the absolute basics of UV mapping, just to make sure that we are all on the same page. And it could be a good refresher for you as well if you're still kind of new to 3D modeling and still kind of trying to wrap your head around UV mapping. Because I know for me, it was a very confusing process when I was just getting started, and just didn't really make sense why I needed to do things the way that I need to do them. And so I'm going to just try to cover all of that. So we're going to get started by actually not doing any of our models here. I'm going to go over and just really cover the absolute basics. And we're going to start with a very simple cube here. Okay, so if you have literally never touched UVs, never done anything with them, you just have, maybe made some stuff in Blender and wanted to texture it, you need to actually UV map that model. So let's talk about how to do that. The first thing that you want to do is go into your UV editing tab here, which will bring you into this section and give you your actual UV layout here. Now, I have a little shortcut here, which you probably will not have. This just sets this up a little bit different for me, but it's kind of the same thing. This is included with ZenUV, which is just a plugin that I use, and it's just a shortcut to just bring me into the UV editing module here. So if you see me doing that, then I'm not really doing anything different other than just going here and changing the viewport look a little bit. All right, so if we go into edit mode, whenever we are selected with a model, then you're going to go ahead and see a representation of your UVs over here. And let's just talk about what UVs are, or what UV mapping is. So UV mapping is the process of taking a 3D model and converting it to where we have a 2D representation of that 3D model. So basically taking all of the faces on the 3D model and laying them out flat to where we can see it from kind of a top-down view here. Now, one example that I wanted to show that I think this kind of might help some people, because this helped me when I was trying to kind of understand the process here. So if you think about a box, which is kind of what we have here with the cube. So we have a 3D box, but you can probably even do this at home. Like if you have an Amazon box or something like that, just kind of take it apart and you can kind of get an idea of what we're doing here. So we're taking a 3D box like this, and we are maybe like cutting it on some areas. Some of these boxes probably even have like cuts already made, and then they're just glued on areas. But essentially, we need to cut some areas to get it to lay out in a flat plane like this, right? So in a box like this, it looks like the sides over here, like this one and this one, are these sides right here. And so they're probably just kind of taped on the inside here. In our case, we're going to use seams to mark a seam where we would want to basically cut that box so that it would lay out flat. And then you can see that the other sides, they don't actually cut because they just can simply lay them out. Whenever these sides are cut, this side will lay down, this side will lay down, and then this side will lay down, and then these other two sides can just lay down. You can see another box like this. So, this is a similar thing where they are cutting it, or again, in this case, they probably just have this like taped or glued, but these are just laying down on the side, and then the box or the top here has these little sections that have been cut so that they can pull it apart and lay it flat like that. Here's another example here where we have a hexagon shaped box. And if you can imagine this top coming off, so you have this 3D hexagon with an open top here. They've had to cut all of the edges here so that those will lay down flat. Same thing for the top there. And I just have some more examples here. And the main thing that I wanted to show here is there's a lot of different ways that you can do this, because essentially these are all just a box, and you can see that they all have kind of different layouts, the way that they've done this. So I think that's one of the important things to understand, and I think that's why it's maybe a little hard to kind of teach this and for people to understand, is because there's not always a set way to do this. There's not always a way that you just say like, oh, okay, you put a seam here and there, and there and there, and then you're done. There's a lot of different ways that you can unwrap even a box like this. So let's continue on with our box now. So whenever we want to actually unwrap something, I need to tell Blender to unwrap it. So I need to select my model, and I need to select all of the faces. So in edit mode, under the faces mode, I'm going to select, or press A to select all, and then I'm going to press the U key, and we will get this little menu that comes up where we have unwrap. Now, if you do it over here, it's going to look a little bit different. Also, depending on what version of Blender you're in, it could look a little bit different as well. I'm using 4.3. I know that 5.0 just came out. I have played around with it a little bit, and it is very, very similar. There's not much that's different, especially in the UV areas. So this should be pretty much the same, but of course, if you're watching this many, many years in the future, be sure to check which version you're on. Things might change around a little bit, but the basic process is still going to be the same. So when I press U, then we're going to bring up this little context menu here, and we have some different options. So you can see that the first one is to unwrap, and that's what we want to do. Now, there's some other options here that some people use. There's a project from view. There's a project from view with bounds. And then you see we have mark seam, clear seams, and reset. Really, the only things that I ever use in this menu are the unwrap, and then I use angle-based. I don't really ever use any of these other ones, and I'm not really going to cover any of these other things because these are a little bit more advanced. And the project from view is kind of like an automatic way of trying to unwrap your model. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't work, but I really would encourage everyone to learn how to do this manually, because especially when you get to much more complex models, that's not always going to work, and you need to learn how to have much more control of your UVs and how to lay them out. So we're going to cover how to do all of this manually, okay? All right, now if I go ahead and just unwrap and click on angle-based, then you see that it kind of does something, but it also gives us an error message here. So it says that it failed and edge seams may need to be added. So let's talk a little bit about seams, because those are going to be very important for us. Seams are the areas or the edge that we're going to cut. So the way that I like to think about it is we take a pair of scissors and we cut an edge so that we literally split a face. If we put a seam on this edge right here, then we would be taking a pair of scissors and cutting through this box so that we could then open that up. Now, the way that this is, if you imagine that all of these are attached, then we would need to, like if we wanted to fold this piece out, we would need to put a cut to there and a cut there as well, right? Then we could take it and fold it out like this. So I've got a box that I created here as well that might help to kind of understand this or think through this a little bit better. So these faces have all been separated. And so the idea that we want to do is we want to figure out where we can cut so that we can lay all of this out into a 2D plane, right? So like I said, there's no real right or wrong way to do this a lot of times, but let's just imagine that we put a cut right here, and we put a cut right there, and then we put a cut right there, okay? And let's just pretend that this is still attached down here. So what we could do is we could then take this and rotate this. Let me just change this to where it rotates on the 3D cursor. So we could rotate this like this and fold it out like that so that it's laying down, okay? And then we could do the same thing for this side over here. We could, well, we already have a cut there, right? We could put a cut there and there. And then if I bring my cursor to there, then we could unfold this to where we have that. And then we could do the same thing here. So cut there and there. And then I can fold this guy down like this. And then we have separate pieces here, but we really wouldn't need to put a cut here. We could, but what we could also do is just take this and fold it like this, and then take this piece and fold it down like this. And now, if we look at that from a 2D plane or a 2D view, and we have that laid out, and that looks good. And you can see that that is actually kind of the same thing that we have with this that is already kind of UV mapped for us, even though we don't have any seams. Now, the default cube is a little bit of an exception here, because normally if you have a 3D model, it's not going to be already kind of UV mapped for us. This is just kind of the way that Blender does this by default, where it already has this kind of UV mapped for us. But all of this is still attached. So we haven't actually added any seams to this or anything. But if I wanted to, and basically kind of do the same thing here, so we can put a seam there. So I'm just marking these in edit mode with edge select. And then I can select the seam or the edges that I want. I can right click, and then I can click on mark seam there. And then you'll see that it actually is represented by the red line. And then if you remember what we did on these other ones, we put a seam there and there, there and there. And now if we do that, click on unwrap, then you'll see that we don't get any error message, and we get the nice clean unwrap there. Okay, now let's just kind of play around and see what would happen. What if we took a seam off there? And what if we just had seams right here? So we've basically separated these faces right here, but we don't have any separation between these other four faces, right? So if I try to unwrap this now, then we get this. This looks really weird, right? But you can see that this is our face there. This is our face there. But what is going on here? Because I'm clicking on that. That looks like a triangle, but that's a square over here. And then, you know, these are our other faces. So what is going on is Blender is trying to basically smash this down and represent it in a 2D plane on our UV map here. And because there's no seam, it will only lay out what it can unfold, and it's not able to unfold these four faces here because they're all attached. And so this is what you get. So one of the ways that I kind of like to kind of check that I'm going about my unwrapping the right way is just to kind of continuously look at my UV layout here. And if I see any weird things going on like this, then I know that I've probably missed a seam and something is not right here. Now, there's a couple of other things that we can do to kind of help aid us in checking if things are wrong here. If I go up here to the overlays, and if I click on under UV stretch here, you can see, we can just leave that on default here. You can see that blue represents no stretching, and then it will be kind of a gradual fade into this green, yellowish, sometimes like even red if it's really, really stretched. So if anything is not blue, then you know that it is stretching. Now you might ask yourself, like, well, okay, who cares? What is the problem? I've still basically done what you said I needed to do, which is have this all laid out in a 2D plane, right? Well, the problem is when we want to actually put a texture on our 3D model. So if I come over here to Substance Painter, and let's say that I want to put this, I don't know, this is like some kind of carpet material on here, and I drag this on, then you see that we have this side looks good, this side looks good, but our other sides, well, that kind of looks okay, but then this looks really weird. This looks really weird. That kind of looks okay, but it's obviously something is not right, right? And that is because, remember, this triangle is actually representing 4 sides. And so one of those sides has been squished down to where it's like right on the edge, and that's what all this stretching is. If we go back here, I don't know exactly which side it is, but if we look at this right here, again, we have 4 sides here, but we only have 3 sides that we're seeing. So one of these sides has basically just been like stretched out to where it is just right on an edge, and that is why we're getting that really bad effect there. So again, in order for us to make sure that our 2D texture is going to look right here, we need to make sure that this is laid out correctly. And in this case, I would need another seam. Now I can put another seam anywhere. I could put it over here. I could put it there. I could put it there. Doesn't matter, okay? I could even do 2 seams. I could put 2 seams on here, and then we have basically 2 parts here. So like that and that is going to be 1 part. If you see, if I go ahead and unwrap that, then if I press L, if I hover my mouse over a face here and press L, that will select what we call the entire UV island. And the UV island is basically just however many faces that we have that have a seam surrounding them. So in this case, it's these 2. And then if I go over here and I press G, you can see that we can actually move that around, right? So same thing for like this, although this is just 1 single face. We only have 1 face there. Now over here, again, if I press L, then I can select all of that. So now you can see here's our 1, 2, 3, 4 faces, or our 4 UV islands, essentially. Even though we have 6 faces, we only have 4 UV islands. Now, the other thing is we could also just split these to where we have a seam on every single side, right? And then if we unwrap, it's going to look pretty much the same, but then all of these are completely separated, okay? So how do I know how many islands I need to have? How many separate faces do I need to have? Well, those are questions that you kind of just have to figure out for yourself. And this is one of those things that as you go through the process and as you go through the full process into the texturing process, things will start to make a little bit more sense to you. You realize that sometimes it's okay to leave faces attached. Sometimes you want to have faces separated. There's just a bunch of different exceptions. Now, I also want to say that this specific workflow is for low poly or kind of low to mid poly. Basically, a workflow where you are not baking like a high resolution mesh onto a low poly mesh. Okay, so I will go over that in a separate video, but this specific workflow is just for kind of a basic low poly UV mapping. So if we did do this where we had everything separated, we could still go ahead and unwrap, and you'll see that it's going to go ahead and lay everything out for us there, and we would be good to go. Now, the last kind of process or the last step in this process is you want to actually pack your UV islands, and you want to pack it into this UV grid that you have here. Now, I say that you want to do that, again, there's a lot of different ways to do this. You do not always have to have your islands all packed into a single grid like this. It can and can be quite common to actually have your islands outside of the UV grid. And I won't get too much into that right now, but I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of a workflow that you might want to do if you would want this to be seamless. And what I mean by seamless is if we go back into Substance Painter here, you can see on the ends, so this is obviously not seamless in that like this texture is gonna, or it looks like it's just continuing all the way around here. And the way that we would want to set this up if we wanted that to be the case, we would have to do that a little bit differently. Okay, so let me just show you what we could do. There's one way that we could do this. So I'm going to just move all of this outside, and I'm going to just click on this single face here, which looks like it's the bottom. Doesn't really matter which one it is. And if I just click on unwrap, you see that it's going to fill up the entire UV grid that we have there. Okay. Now, what I could do is I can overlap these. If I do this for each one, okay, I've got all of these placed in the UV grid here, and they're all filling the entire grid. So then when I go to actually place the texture on there, okay, now just to make this a little bit easier for us to see, instead of having to switch back into Substance Painter over and over, this will be a little bit easier. I'm just using ZenUV. Again, this is a paid add-on. Don't have to have this at all. This is just to help you kind of understand what's going on here. So I've just placed this checkered image to help us kind of see what is lined up. And actually, I'm going to just unwrap all of this to kind of see where we were. So now you can see here's our original layout. It's a little bit hard to see there, but you can see our faces right here. And we've got all of these separated with seams, so these are all individual faces. But you can obviously see that this is not going to be a seamless texture the way that this is laid out, because when we wrap around here, you can see that there's going to be a very clear seam right there on that texture. So if I undo this a little bit to change it back to how we had it, to where these were all filled in, then you can see that this looks a little bit better now. This, at least as far as the grid goes, these are all going to be lined up. But the other thing that you've got to think about is the direction, right? So, for example, this, you can see that this, if we say that this is the correct way that we want to have this texture go, then this one over here is upside down. So I would need to go over to my UV area and actually rotate that. So I'm going to hold Control so that it'll snap. And then you can see that we can rotate it to where that is now the correct direction. And if we look over here, I would need to rotate this direction. And this can get a little confusing sometimes, because sometimes it'll look like you need to rotate it one way and the direction you're rotating it over here is not necessarily the correct direction. So you kind of have to, it's almost like a little bit of a pat your head and rub your stomach kind of thing when you're in this dual view like this. Okay, and then if we look at this one, we can see that this one needs to be rotated like that. And then that would give us a nice, clean, seamless edge all the way around here. Now, this is also only going to work for a seamless texture, which I'm not going to get too much into that, but a seamless texture just basically is a texture that is set up to where if you place the texture side by side, then you will not be able to see a seam, okay? So keep this in mind when you are setting up your UVs. If you want them to be a seamless texture, this is one way that you could do it. Now, another way that you could do this is it is perfectly fine for your UVs to be off-centered or outside of your actual UV area here. So this is fine if you wanted to lay it out like this, or even do something like this. So we have all of our sides laid out like this. We could even do something like this, bring our sides up above and below. They could be on the outside. But the main important part, if you're working with a seamless, if you want this to be seamless, is that it needs to fill this UV grid, and then each face needs to be right on the edge of each other like that. Okay. Now, again, this is only if you are wanting this to be a perfectly seamless texture. If you are going to bring this into Substance Painter, or you're going to do some kind of texture painting on this or something like that, then it's perfectly fine to just do a simple unwrap like this and then pack everything in, which everything is really already packed. We'll go over packing later, but this would be fine as well. Okay, so I hope I'm not confusing you guys too much. It's just that there are so many different ways to do this, and I'm trying to kind of cover all of the different ways that you can do this. So let's move on from our basic cube and do some more examples, and I think that might kind of help make some more of this clear. Now, one really important thing that I think I might have forgotten to mention, so I wanted to just go ahead and put this in the spot right here because it's very important to really do before you even start UV unwrapping anything, is to make sure that your scale is applied correctly. So you can always check that your scale is applied correctly if your scale over here is set to 1 on X, Y, and Z. But if I were to do something like scale this on the Z and scale this up like this, you'll see that it's not all set to 1 right here. So when I go into unwrap, this is going to still basically think that it is a regular cube with the cube dimensions. And you'll even see that it kind of gives me a little bit of a message down here saying, hey, this has a non-uniform scale. This will be a non-scaled version. So in order to get this to be correct, I need to apply my scale. So I need to go back into object mode, and I can hit Control A and then apply scale right here. You can also go up to object, apply scale from there, but I always just use the shortcut Control A and apply scale. You'll see that that sets everything to be 1 by 1 by 1. And now when we go in and actually unwrap, then we will get the correct proportions for the model that we are unwrapping there. Okay, so be sure to remember to always apply your scale before you actually unwrap your model. Okay, so let's move on to something that's a little bit different. So we have a cube again, but this one has a bevel on all of the edges. Okay, so if we go into edit mode, and let's go back into UV mode as well. And if we just kind of see how everything is laid out, then really I would recommend just not even trying to work with this until you've placed seams on it and you kind of start to think about where you want to place seams. All right, so, if we select everything, we hit unwrap, then of course it's going to give us an error because we don't have any seams. So now we need to think about how we're going to unwrap this. And we can kind of think about the same thing, same process, right? But we're going to have to do some things a little differently here. So my advice, if you're just trying to learn how to do this, is just experiment. Just try things, see what happens, see what looks right, see what doesn't look right. Start to kind of understand what looks incorrect and where you need to fix things. Again, one thing that will definitely help is to turn on the overlay here for UV stretching. And so you can see right here, these triangles are showing that it's pretty stretched. So if I see which face that is, that's this right here. And again, because we don't have any seams on here, it's just trying to flatten this out and stretch it out, okay? So let's just put a seam on here. Let's say that we put a seam all the way around the edge here and see what would happen. So let's mark a seam right there. And then let's select everything and unwrap. And then we'll see what happens. Okay, so that obviously looks terrible, right? There is definitely something that is not working right there. Another thing that we can do that can be really helpful when you're just kind of learning this and you can kind of see exactly what's going on is if you go over here under options, you can turn on live unwrap. And this can be kind of cool because now if I place a seam right here, and let's say that we place another one right there, then you can see that moved, that unwrapped right away. So as I go in here and place seams, it's going to automatically unwrap it for us. And that can be really useful to see what's going on and kind of help us. So I'm going to back up a little bit, just back to where we were. And let's talk about why this is incorrect, first of all. So if we, first of all, go here, I'm going to press L to select our entire island that we have selected. So we can see it's this one. So why is this wrong? Well, the first things that I notice is we have if I look at this from the top, we have a perfect square. and that is not a perfect square. You can see it is, this is angled here, and we want this to all be perfectly lined up. And the reason that we want that to be perfectly lined up again is because when we put our texture on there, we want our texture to be aligned, and we don't want to have any crooked textures or weird things going on with our texture. So how could we fix that? Well, we could just put a seam right here and just cut this entire section out, right? If I did that, then you can see that we've got this, and that looks fine, right? And I could keep kind of going with this, and I could say, well, okay, I could put a seam there. I could do a seam there. I could just go all around here and basically just put a seam on everything, right? Well, like that should work. That looks good. It's laying everything out. Everything is nice and straight. Obviously, we can't really straighten a triangle like we can a square or a rectangle, but we don't have any stretching going on. And this would work. Like we could just keep going and just place a seam on every single edge. And in fact, if we just did that, if I just select everything and we just mark seam, then you can see that it lays it out, and hey, that works. So why would we not want to do that is a question that you probably have. And the main reason that we wouldn't want to do this is because it can get kind of complicated when you have a much more complex model. It can get pretty complicated to have all of these separated UV islands here. And we haven't really talked about this, but when we get to more complex models, we might have like hundreds of faces and UV islands here. And as we pack them, when we go to pack them, then we want to be as efficient as possible in packing these in. And another thing that I haven't really talked about here, but you can see when I zoom in, is there's a little bit of a gap in between these. And you want to have a little bit of a gap in between your UV islands. And that's a little bit more of an advanced subject there, but basically just know that you need to have a little bit of a gap here. You don't want to have these right next to each other because it can cause some issues when you go to texture. And we also haven't really talked about packing, so let's go ahead and talk about packing. So that's kind of the last process, or the last step in our process, is to actually pack the island, or pack the UV area. And Blender, unfortunately, does not have a great method of doing this, but they do have a method for it. So if we go under UV here, and you'll see pack islands. So that's what we want to do. We want to pack our islands. And if we just leave everything default, just click on pack, it'll take a little while. It's a little slow. This is by far kind of the worst thing about Blender to me. And this is why I use a paid add-on to do this. And you can actually see that that did not really do a lot at all. Okay, so it really just kind of like tried to change these. Basically what it's trying to do, I guess it would probably be better if I maybe like mix this up a little bit. So if we had all this just like all over the place, something like this, and then I went to UV, let's see, pack islands. If we did that, now it's going to take all of that and it's going to try, or it's not going to try, but it is going to use an algorithm to place all of this within our UV bounds there. Okay, and that just makes things easier for when we go to texture, and we can just keep it all nice and tidy. Now, again, I know you're probably thinking, well, why would we do that when I just said that we can have this stuff, all over the place? We can have it outside. Well, again, there's multiple ways to do this, but in our workflow that we're going to go here, that we're doing here, we're going to generally pack our islands as our last step. Now, the other thing that we want to do is we want to have a gap in here, and generally, I like to have more of a gap than that, okay? Now, there's no right or wrong answer for how much you need to have, and I usually like to do this by pixels, but I guess I can't do it by pixels here. That's kind of weird. So, yeah, that's kind of weird. I thought that you could change this to pixels. Generally, I like to have about a 5 pixel gap or more, depending on how large my texture resolution is going to be. But for this, let's just go with maybe like 0.05, see what that looks like. So let's hit pack. Okay, and so that's going to give me that. That's not bad. That might be a little too much. This is, again, one of those things that you'll just kind of have to play around with, figure out what works best for you. There probably is like technically an industry standard that, if you're going to have like a 2K texture, you want to have a 10 pixel gap or something like that. But I don't worry too much about that. I just go with whatever works for me. All right, so keep that in mind. You do want to make sure that you have a decent little gap. This is probably too much, but this would be fine as well. But now you will see that when we get this, we do have a lot of empty space. And generally, you want to try and reduce as much empty space as you can, because this is actually representing the resolution of how much resolution you're going to have with your texture here. Because if we have let's say a 2K texture here, well, this is just a little tiny area of that 2K texture. So it's not going to be really, really detailed, as opposed to if we had this entire island fill out the entire area like that, then this would be more detailed. I hope that makes sense. I guess what I could do is show that with our checkered image again. So you can see here, these are pretty large, right? Whereas if I change this, the larger I go, the smaller this gets, which means that we have more resolution there. So, we could make this gigantic and then we have a lot of resolution. Or if we have it small like this, we have less resolution. So this is why it is important to try and be as efficient as possible when we are placing our seams, so that we can unwrap something like this to where we have the most resolution possible. All right, so let's actually just remove all of this, and let's talk about how I would go about unwrapping this. So I'm just going to clear all of our seams there. And let's think about how we could do this. So if I put seams there and there all the way around, mark a seam, and then I really only need to cut one area right here. So if I did that, then you can see this unwraps it like that, and that looks good. But we still have these top areas, which are these areas, that need to be fixed, right? So what I could do is place cuts here, here, and here, and do something like that. And then you'll see that this is still connected, but we've cut it in a way that is going to allow us to kind of unwrap this, and then unwrap this part right here to lay that all flat. And then we could do the same thing down here. Okay, mark a seam there. And then we have this, which looks good. But you can see that our resolution is still pretty low, right? And so if I go ahead and try to pack this, let's see, pack. Okay, now, first of all, this is going to be an issue here, especially if we would want to have like an actual tile on here. So let's Control Z to undo that. And I believe there's an option in here so by default, it is going to rotate. So we could uncheck that if we didn't want it to rotate, and now it won't rotate. All right, but we still have this issue to where we have this entire island, which it's laid out right, like this is perfectly fine, but we just don't have a lot of resolution here. So we could create more resolution by putting an additional seam in here. So let me see where I put a seam right there. So maybe on the opposite side, we go and we put another seam there. So if I did that, then you can see all of a sudden, okay, this got a lot bigger. These islands got bigger, and we got more resolution, right? So this is just kind of what you have to do. You have to just kind of work with your model and figure out how to unwrap things in a way that is going to give you more resolution and be as efficient as possible. All right. So let's go into something else. Let's go to this guy, and let's kind of think about how we would go about unwrapping this, because this is a little bit different shape. It's still kind of this cube, but we've got some pretty heavy bevels here, and we've just got like some, different bevels that are going into straight edges, and Now, also keep in mind, this is not really the best topology here. We've got a big N gone, but we're not really worried too much about topology. We're really just worried about how to unwrap these kind of things, all right? So this is an issue that I feel like a lot of people run into with dealing with bevels like this and how you go about unwrapping something like this. So what I like to do, I like to try and look for flat surfaces first. So I've got this large flat surface in the back, and I know that that would work well to just go ahead and do that. And then I just have a nice clean flat surface there. So that works fine, right? What else could I do? Well, I could just put an edge all the way around here. And if I did that, then I still need another edge like here, or a seam here or here. It doesn't really matter. Let's just put one there. And then that's going to unwrap to give me something like that. So that looks good. So now we've got all of this. This entire island is fine. Now, if we wanted more resolution, we might want to add another seam somewhere. We could, maybe put one there. We could do something like that. Again, like I said, there's no right or wrong way to do this. You could absolutely just do this. Maybe you just want to have seams like that, and you just want to have this top area that is just its own UV island. That works as well. All right, I'm going to go back a little bit though. And now we need to figure out how to do this area. And this area is going to be a little bit more tricky because you can see we've got quite a bit of stretching here. We do have just like this flat face. So, I mean, we could put a seam here, but that doesn't really help us because we still just have all these edges that need to be fixed. So I'm just going to undo that. Let's just think about what we could do. What if we put a seam like right here? Okay, if we just put one all the way across there, what does that do? Well, okay, that kind of starts to help us a little bit, right? Maybe we could do the same thing over here. See what that does. And okay, now that's looking good. Actually, this area looks good, right? We don't have any stretching there. And you can see that this is kind of trying to work out for us, but we still have these rounded edges here, and this is kind of hard to work with. So we need to figure out how we want to deal with that. So what I might do is I might do something like this. Okay. Now, if we take a look at that, you can see that these areas look pretty good. We still have some weird stuff going on here. And I will go ahead and warn you, you can't always get this perfect, especially when you're dealing with curves, right? And you kind of just have to determine if you have to decide how much effort you want to put into this. Do you want to make this as flat as possible? Well, yes, but you also want to try and make it as efficient as possible and also save as much time because you could, spend, especially on a more complex model, you could spend hours just trying to place seams and get them perfectly unwrapped. All right, so there's, like I said, and I think you probably understand, there's so many different ways to do this, right? You could try and do something where you like put a seam there and there, do something like that. Okay, that looks pretty good there. Then you go over here, or whoops, do something like this. Okay. Now that's starting to kind of come together and look a little bit better. We at least have like this all separated into quads here. These are all quads here, so we could straighten these if we wanted to. And I guess that's another thing that I'll go ahead and talk about. So a lot of times, or not a lot of times, but sometimes if you have all quads like this, you might want to try and straighten all of this to where it's like one, basically just one square, so that it will be more efficient to where we can fit it on here. And this is another kind of unfortunate thing that Blender is not great with. There's some add-ons, some paid add-ons that I use to where I can do something like this with ZenUV. I can come in and I can just hit quadrify, and we will just perfectly straighten all of our edges and make all of those into perfect squares. Now you'll see that that does give us some issues because it actually stretches it more, right? And again, no right or wrong way to do this. Sometimes this is okay, sometimes this might not be okay. It's really just up to you to determine, and depends on the texture that you're going to use and the process and everything like that. So you really just have to figure that out for yourself. But talking a little bit more about quadrifying or straightening these edges in Blender, there's unfortunately not a really easy way to do that. And I'm going to show you a way that I don't think is a great way, but this does work if you want to go about it and if you really need to get something straight. All right, so what you can do is you can select an edge like this. So I've got this edge selected, okay? And I basically want to make a central quad perfectly straight on each sides. So what I can do is I can size this by pressing X and then X, or I'm sorry, press S, X, and then 0. And so that's going to line that up perfectly straight on the X coordinate, okay? Then I can do the same thing over here, S, X, 0. And then I need to do the Y as well. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to do S, Y, 0. And I'm going to go here and do S, Y, 0, okay? I know that's a lot of work, but that's just the way that this goes. Now what I can do, I can select all of this and I can click on Follow Active Quads, and then that will do essentially that one-click process that I did there, okay? I know it's not a great method, but there are some times that you really do, actually we'll have an example where you probably really want to try and get these lined up like that, and that is a way that you can do it. If anybody wants a recommendation for a paid mod that does this and a bunch of other things, I like ZenUV. I'm not sponsored or anything like that. I just really like it and use it, but it does cost a little bit, okay? This is another area that you might want to fix and do something like that. Just keep in mind that if you did want to do something like that, you would need to split this as well. So you would want to have a seam there to where we have just this section, okay? And then we could do something. Actually, this looks like it is pretty close to being correct. So I'm going to go ahead and try and click on Follow Active Quads. And yeah, you can see that actually worked pretty well there. So you can kind of play around with that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes you'll need to set it up to where you have at least one quad kind of centrally located to your island that is perfectly aligned on the X and Y to where it's perfectly up and down and horizontal like that. So anyway, I know there's a lot to this. I'm trying to cover as many different methods and as many different ways to do things as possible. All right, so this is probably a bit messy for me. I probably wouldn't even worry about this. I would probably just go back here and clear this, and I would probably just keep it like that, or I might even remove that as well to where I just have that, and that would probably be fine for me, okay? But it just depends. It just depends on what you're trying to do. It just depends on how seamless you want your textures to be, or if you're using seamless textures or things like that, then you just have to play around and find what works. Okay, so let's go to something a little bit different. So we have another cube here, and I've got a little bit of a bevel here, but the main thing here is we have, let me just isolate this so that we can see. We have this kind of indent area here, right? And so how would we go about doing this? Well, let's take a look. All right, so we could kind of do this basically the same way that we've done the other cubes. Let's just say that we cut out this face here, and then maybe we just put a seam all the way around there to where we get something like that. And then on this area, I just want to put seams here, here, and here so that it will kind of cut those and lay that out perfectly like that. Okay. And then we would need to maybe do something like this to where we've got that. But then we still have this area over here. So how would we go about setting that up? Well, what I would do is I would probably try to get this single face right here cut out. Okay, so I can put seams like that. And now we have this, which is this one face, which looks good. And then we need to do something here. So we could cut out this middle part. Okay. And then we need one more cut somewhere in here because we have this section right here. And obviously, if you're going to just flatten that out, you need at least one cut in here to get something like that. Okay. Now, again, depending on if you're trying to get a little bit more resolution, you might want to put another cut there. That would allow you to make those a little bit larger, right? And yeah, that would probably be fine. I would probably just leave it like this. Just have a single cut there and just go with that. Okay, let's go to a cylinder because this is obviously different, but it's going to be pretty similar as well. So when it comes to a cylinder, the main things that I like to look at, and actually I'm going to even make this a little bit more complex just to give us some more examples. So let's do something, maybe we have something kind of like this. Okay, maybe, I don't know, let's do something like that. All right, give us a lot of different shapes there. All right, so what can we do here? There's a lot of different ways that we could do this as well. We could, if we wanted to be very simple, we could put a seam on the top and bottom like that. And then we could literally just put a single seam all the way down the edge like that. And that is going to kind of work for us, right? But we're going to have some issues. As you can probably already see, we have a lot of weird stretching here. Now, like I said, sometimes that's okay. Sometimes that'll be fine. Sometimes it's not. But we want to think about where the stretching is going to be really bad. So if we look at a checkered texture here, let me also just turn off our stretching so that we can see this a little bit better. Okay, so you can see this is all kinds of messed up here, right? Mainly like these areas right here. We would really want, ideally, we would want this to be to where you don't really see a seam there, or you have the texture that wraps around nice and evenly, okay? Now, this might be a case where we would want to do something like we try to do the follow active quads. And actually, I have no idea. If I just try that, let me see what it does. And yeah, you can see that did not work at all. So what we could do is do our little trick here where we do SX0. Just find a quad that is kind of in the center somewhere. SY0. And then SY0. Okay. Now, if I try this again, follow active quads, that looks much better. Didn't mean to get these. But yeah, this looks much better, right? So now you can see it's all nice and lined up. And really, that would probably work depending on your texture. However, there might be some other reasons that you would want to do this a little bit differently. Up here, you probably are going to have some stretching going on. If we go back to our stretching, you can see that these are, like especially these, are going to be stretched a little bit. So you might want to do something a little bit different where you put seams like this, mark a seam there, and then actually clear this seam. And if we do that, then you're going to see that we get a nice, perfectly unstretched 2D image of that up there, right? Now, it's not going to give us the nice seamless texture that's going to go from this edge to that edge. So it just depends, right? There's going to be some instances where that is okay, some instances where it's not okay. If you have like a metal texture or something like that, then you're probably not going to notice much stretching or anything. But if you had writing on here and you needed that to be perfectly curved along these faces or circular here, then that could be an issue if this was stretched. All right. So on other areas here, you might want to do something similar and do something like this. Mark a seam there, clear that seam. You could do it here as well. Let's actually just clear that one. Okay, mark a seam there. And you see that we're starting to get nice, everything is nice and deep blue there. Okay, these areas, so this top right here, this, if you had writing on here, and you didn't want any stretching, you could put a seam right there, and then you would get a nice long section there that would be really easy to write on. This area is going to be a little bit harder, right? Right now, the way it is, or the way it looks, that looks really good as far as no stretching. Okay, so another thing to think about is when we go to pack these, whenever we have curved things like this, we're not really being as efficient as we could, as opposed if I go way back here to where we just have like this one large area like this really is going to give us the higher Texel density amount that we could pack this, and that would be a little bit more efficient as opposed to having multiple islands. So once again, it just depends, right? Okay, moving on to something like this. This is really, I feel like this is even more simplistic than this at this point, but I'll still just kind of show what I would do here, because you will have instances where you have, kind of a inset circular type shape like this. So we have a box, which we could do just like we've done all the other ones. I would cut this face out right here, and then I would also cut this out so that I have that. Let's just go ahead and show that. And then I would do something like this to where we just have that as a single UV island. And then we could just put anywhere in here. It doesn't really matter. I guess depending on if you're going to see the seam, you might want to think about, but we really just need one area to unwrap all of that, okay? And then for the rest of this, we just need to do something kind of like this, okay? Then we've got that. And then, again, it's up to you. Maybe you want to have this split up a little bit more, maybe not. It just depends. All right, now the last thing that I want to talk about is a sphere, because we kind of touched on this when we were going over this over here. But when it comes to a sphere or really kind of curved objects like this, you're never going to be able to get this perfect because it's just the nature of it being a sphere. No matter how many sections you cut this up into, unless you literally cut this up into every single quad and triangle, you could do that, but that would be horribly inefficient. So how do I go about unwrapping something like this? Well, there's a few different ways that you can do it. I usually do something like putting a seam here and here, and then doing something like this, marking a seam like that, and then I'll get something like this. Okay, so we have just these top areas, or top and bottom areas, that look pretty good. And then for this, I would probably use ZenUV. I'm just going to do it because it's a little bit quicker here, or do the follow active quads to get something like that. Okay. Obviously, you're going to have some stretching going on, but that's not going to be too big of a deal. But again, just depends on what exactly you're texturing on there. And then lastly, we would just want to go in and pack. Okay, to where we have something like that. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is Texel density. So that's basically just how much resolution we're getting on here and how much resolution we are having represent on the UV grid here. So this can be a number of different resolutions. It could be 512 by 512. It could be 1024 by 1024, 2K, 4K, etc. And obviously, the larger these things are, the more resolution you're going to have. I showed that with the checker that we did, the checker texture there, right? So you can see that that's kind of representing the resolution there. If I increase this, must be on the bottom. Yep. So if I increase this, we're adding resolution into that, right? If I decrease it, we're taking resolution out. Okay, so that is something that is very important to think about. Maybe like this might be a little bit better of an example. Let's look at just this. So if we look at this and let's put our checker image on there. So as it stands right now, everything is the same texel density. And what I mean by that, each UV island is kind of like the same ratio, right? Like if I were to make this bigger, you can see obviously we have a much higher texel density right here than we do over here. And you might think, well, okay, that would give us weird results, right? Because if we have like a really high resolution wood texture on here or something, then the like the grains might be really small and then they get really large over here, and that is absolutely the case. But there's sometimes where we might want more resolution. Let's say that like this was a little, I don't know, like a little thing on a piece of electronic device that we're making. And maybe most of this was all just metal, but maybe we wanted to actually have some writing in here. And there's like a little label in here. And as you can see right now, all of this is the same texel density. But what if we wanted to have more resolution in there? Because when we go to write text, that's a really small area for us to write into. And if you're using something like Substance Painter, if you are not using a really high texture, then it might be really blurry. So what I could do is I could think about, well, I've got like a lot of extra room in some of these areas, right? So what if I just like brought it up here and I just stretched it out to where I did that, and I gave myself, now I have a higher texel density in here, or more resolution, but we didn't change anything else. Everything all fits in here, right? And I could maybe even say like, look, I'm just going to put a metal texture on here. So I don't really care if like this is a lower resolution. So I could maybe just lower the resolution of all of this. We could do something way down there, and I could raise the resolution of this and go with something more like that. And then you can see like I have a really high texel density in here, which means I have a lot of resolution, and not a lot of resolution out here. But that might be fine. If I'm just going to put a metallic texture on there, but I need more resolution in here to write something to where we can actually see it, then that would probably be better, right? And then we could still go in here and pack this. So if we go to pack, you'll want to uncheck scale, because otherwise it's going to change the scale for you. And then it'll go ahead and try to pack. Now, again, Blender's pack engine is terrible. So I wanted to just briefly cover texel density, because that is something that is very important. And I get a lot of questions on that. And like everything, it just depends. You know, it depends on how much resolution you want in certain areas. Depends on what kind of texture you're going to have. If you need it to be seamless, if you don't mind having seams, and, you know, being able to have a larger area that you can, or a larger resolution that you can write things in that, or need more detail or something like that. So it just depends. Okay, so with all of that, I hope I've tried to cover as much as I can as far as the basics. I still didn't really cover everything. Like this is really, really just one of those things that you have to just practice. You can watch videos, you can watch my videos, but until you just sit down and try to start unwrapping your own models, you're not really going to get the hang of it. So you just got to practice. Don't be afraid to practice and post it in the Discord and say like, hey, how does this look? Does this look good? Could I do this better? Is there a more efficient way that I could, you know, unwrap this? Where could I place seams? Those things like that. Don't be afraid to ask for critique. That's how we learn and how we get better. So I encourage you all to do that. All right. So with all of that, we can now start UV mapping our actual models that we've created. So if you have skipped ahead and you are ready to just start unwrapping these, then I've already gone through the basics. So I will still kind of walk through what I'm doing, but we're going to do this pretty fast because I've already shown the basics, and this is really just using the exact same fundamentals. We're just going to go through all of these. All right. So the other thing that I did do is I took out just the individual pieces. So obviously we have multiple walls. We have a lot of these pillars and everything like that. I've taken this all out to where I just have the pieces that I need to recreate that, okay, which are these 15 meshes here. And we're going to go through and start unwrapping that. So I'm just going to start with the floors here. Hey guys, this is Future Hal coming in with just a couple of notes and things that I wanted to talk briefly about before we actually get into all of this. There are a number of things that I think I could have done a lot better here, and I wanted to just kind of mention it for a few reasons, mainly just to let you know that I'm not perfect, and there's a lot of things that I could have done a lot better in the way that I modeled things, and even the way that I actually show the full process of unwrapping things here. Specifically with the windows, these were pretty messy, and I'm not really even sure exactly why I modeled them the way that I did. I think that something happened when I merged some vertices here, that some things got kind of merged together that I didn't really mean to have merged together. To be perfectly honest, if I was doing this as like an actual project for myself, I probably would have just completely restarted these windows from scratch, but I kind of tried to salvage them to just show you how you can do that, and just wanted to leave it all in and just show that I make mistakes as well. So you'll see me as I start to kind of unwrap some of this, kind of realize my mistake, and then just skip ahead in a few areas to where I do kind of fix the issues and talk a little bit about it. The other thing that I wanted to mention is there are so many different workflows for doing all of this, and I feel like I'm maybe trying to cover a little bit too much. So I just wanted to mention here that this specific workflow is not really for bringing into something like Substance Painter to texture this. The workflow that I'm showing here is really just to bring these models directly into Unreal Engine and then just place a material on them with a texture, and they'll be good to go like that. Now, there are pretty big disadvantages of doing that, or not really disadvantage, but it's just, again, it's just a different workflow. And using Substance Painter, you have a really, really powerful tool that can do all kinds of really cool things, where you can add all kinds of layers and generators and edgeware and that kind of stuff. And it's really, really cool and very powerful. But I know a lot of people don't have that. So this specific workflow that I'm showing is just for kind of getting everything prepared to bring into Unreal Engine and just use a regular texture that you would find on something like Ambient CG or Polyhaven, or if you just have your own seamless textures or something like that that you want to use, then that would be for this. Again, I mentioned this later in the video, but we will be doing a separate video or series of videos where I will show how to do kind of a full Substance Painter workflow as well. So just stay tuned for that. But I just wanted to kind of butt in here and just mention that. So I didn't really want to, have you go into this thinking that this might be a Substance Painter workflow and then go through 2 hours of this video and then realize that we're not actually using Substance Painter. So if you are looking for Substance Painter, then that will be a separate video. So yeah, just keep that in mind. All right, thanks guys. Now we are going to need to think about areas that we are going to want to be seamless, and the floor is going to be one of those, right? So I want this to be I'm going to have like a tile on here that we're going to use, and I want this to repeat, and I want it to be seamless to where you don't see any seams or anything like that. So we need to think about how we're going to do that when we set that up. All right. So what I'm going to do is put a seam all the way around the edge. And I'm also going to turn off live unwrap. That's very useful when you're starting out. And even sometimes I still use that. But for right now, I'm also going to turn off the stretching because I know basically exactly what I want to do with this. And the important thing here, because I want this to be seamless, is I need this top part to completely fill out the UV grid here. Okay, so I'm going to unwrap just that to where I have this. And these other sides, I don't really care too much about this because I'm not going to see these. Now, if you were going to see these, then that, might be an issue. But in my case, I'm not going to see these. So I'm just going to put a seam here. And really, I guess what I can do is I'll actually just, we're really just separating all of these, which is fine. So we have, if we were to just do an unwrap, we would have something like this. These pieces right here, so these are all along the edge. I don't really care where those go. The main important part is that my top is completely filled in, and then my bottom, I'll just completely fill that in as well. So we do have these overlapping. Actually, so I don't want there to be any gap here or margin. So I'm going to reduce this to 0. And I'll unwrap that again because I want those to all go right to the edge so that it's seamless, okay? And then these literally doesn't matter. I could actually pack these inside of this as well if we wanted to. I could have them out here. I could have them wherever. For me, I don't care because I'm never going to see those. And I don't mind if the texture that we're going to put on there just goes around those as well. So that is fine for what I need. All right. Okay, so that piece is done. All right. So maybe what I do just to know that we are finished is I'll move things out as we go. Let's do this wall. Okay. So for this, now again, I do want this to be seamless on the edges, so I need to think about that. In that case, I am going to put a seam all the way around the edge of the kind of front face here, where I get something like that. And then if I select this island and just unwrap that, let's see, I'm going to do Control I. That will inverse my selection, and I'm going to move all this out. All right, so I can see what I have here. Now, what I want to do in this case is I'm going to change my cursor. Let's see. Yeah, I'm going to change my cursor to scale from the 2D cursor. And then I want to scale this to where it fills this out. Okay, so I'm going to bring it right to the edge like that. Okay, now, like I mentioned earlier, it's fine that this is going outside. That's perfectly fine. The main thing that I want to make sure that I'm having happen here is the edges on this edge and this edge are perfectly aligned so that when we have a wall or something like that, it's going to line up perfectly along the same edge there. All right, and then we're going to do the same thing over here as well. So I'll just go ahead and select all of this. Okay, we'll mark a seam for that. And then let's go ahead and unwrap that. Okay, so in this case, it's kind of flipped around, but I can still go ahead and scale this out. Make sure that it is perfectly filled out like that. And then I just need to basically rotate this. So we'll rotate this X 180 and then just bring it over and all the way up to where I have that. And then the last thing that I have are my the outside areas and then these inside areas. These are kind of the same thing. I don't really care too much about these, so I'm never going to see these. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and mark basically all of these edges here. Okay, and then I'll just unwrap on that, and that's fine, just to leave it like that. Again, it could be like inside of here, it could be outside. It really doesn't matter to me because I'm never going to see those. All right, so that piece is done. Move that over here. Let's do this guy. All right, so now this is actually going to be incredibly easy. Yeah, we don't even need a seam here. I can literally just do that. And yeah, this is all fine because this will go all the way to the edge and then that will be seamless. So that is good. Easy peasy. Okay, let's do our wall. So our basic wall, since we're essentially going to mark every edge as a seam, I have a little shortcut here to just mark the mark sharp edges, but it's really just the same thing as selecting everything. And then I'm just going to mark mark seam for everything there. And then let's actually just move all of this out because I do want to make sure that I unwrap it, and then we need to scale this up. Okay, and then I need to do the same thing for this guy. So unwrap, scale like that, and then these guys will just unwrap and just leave them like that. Okay. All right, so let's do this guy. So basically exact same thing. I'm going to mark all of the sharp edges with a seam and go ahead and just move all of this out. Let's get just this, unwrap, scale to, oh, let's see. Oh, okay, yeah, I thought that it was giving me a little bit of a margin. Okay, scale like that, and then same thing over here. Unwrap and scale out like that. And then all of the other pieces can just do a simple unwrap and leave them in there like that. Okay, let's do our last wall here. Same thing, sharp edges, mark seam, move everything out. I'm just moving everything out so it makes everything a little bit easier to work with when I unwrap this. Okay, scale this out. Same thing over here. Scale out or scale up. And then all of this unwrap, and that's good. Okay, let's do the pillar. All right, so for the pillar, I need to also go ahead and apply my mirror. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, let's mark some seams, because sometimes marking your seams before you apply your mirror is a good idea, because then you don't have to mark seams on other areas. So I will want a seam there. And I think this is probably going to be fine to lay out like that. And then we'll just do a seam all the way down there. Actually, for this, I don't really need the face there. We'll just get rid of that. And really, I could even bring this up a little bit. Just barely needs to go in there. Okay, and then this is basically just one cube that we have. So let's just mark a seam. Doesn't really matter. Just right there. And let's just see where we're at if I go ahead and unwrap that. Okay, so what have I got going on right here? Okay. So yeah, that needs to need to mark all of this. Okay. All right, so now let's go ahead and apply my mirror. And I can do a little cleanup here because I don't need that. Don't need any of this. Dissolve those. Okay, and yeah, so actually we don't need seams there. But we do need one all the way around here. Let's see how that looks. Okay, I think that all looks good. Oh, okay. Actually, hold on. Let me just do a quick merge here. Yeah, so I didn't realize, I think I think I had mirrored that entire cube. So we had like 4 times the number of faces there. So I just merged all of that. Let's do another unwrap. Yeah, that looks way better. Didn't know where all those faces came from. All right, so that looks good. So that guy is done. Move that over. Let's see. Let's do this. Actually, what we could do, because this will be similar to our other railing there, it's going to go like that. So we could put all of this on the same thing. So let me go ahead and move this over. And these two, we can just select everything, unwrap, and that'll be fine like that. I might want to bring this over a little bit just to give myself some space there. But yeah, as long as this is going all the way from top to bottom, then we are good. All right, so let's look at our windows here. So our windows are going to be a little bit different because, first of all, we need to have 2 separate materials. And one material we're going to have separate for our glass, and then the other is going to be for all of our window here. So in this case, I need to actually create a material. All right. So over here, I'm going to click on the plus to add a material slot here. And then I need to click on new, and we're going to call that glass. And then make sure that I have the actual section that I want to assign to that for glass. And I'm going to click on assign. Okay. Okay, now for everything else, so I'm just going to select everything and then hold shift to deselect that. I need to add another material, and we're going to call that window. And then I want to assign that. So click on assign with that selected. And now I like to check this because sometimes it doesn't actually work. So I'm just going to, with everything unselected, I'm going to click on window or glass, click select, and just make sure that it did actually assign that to the correct thing. And then I'll do that with glass as well. Just click on select, make sure that it did actually assign that correctly. Sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it'll be like, oh, you actually assigned the entire thing to glass. So yeah, just make sure that that is correct there. All right, so for this, when it comes to unwrapping, we're going to have 2 sets of UVs here. And for our glass, if I go in and just do an unwrap, that's really all I need to do there. Oh, we also need to make sure that we've applied our scale, okay? And then let's just do that again just to make sure that that is, yeah, it was slightly off there. All right, so that is good for that. And then we need to mark our seams for the rest of the window here. So in this case, I am going to maybe do something like this. And let me think. Let's start on the bottom here because we've got one large area here. So that can be its own face. Let's see. Let me move all of this. Control I, and I'm just going to go ahead and unwrap that. Okay, so obviously we've got a lot of work to do, but I just want to see what we have done. So we've got our bottom there done. How do we want to do this? I think maybe going all the way around here would be a good idea, to have kind of a separate face like this. Okay, then I've got all of that, and then we'll do something like maybe this inside part here, do the outside as well. Okay, let's go ahead and see where we are. Whoops, I didn't actually mean to select my glass. Okay, so we're starting to kind of get something, a lot more to do though, obviously. I think that we're going to need to, I need to also think about kind of like the the grain of the wood that we're going to use. So like we probably want like this to be a single section. So let's do a seam through there and then like up here and then there. Okay, so we mark something like that. Actually, let's turn on live unwrap for this. That will probably be helpful. I don't know why that didn't actually work. Do I have to put a seam? Okay, yeah, there we go. All right, so let me just see where that is. So I think that looks fine. We'll need to do kind of the same thing here. Actually, we'll just go all the way around. Mark that. And I'm going to mark these corners. Okay, still looking pretty messy, but we're making some progress. So I think for this, I'm going to go all the way across. Same thing over here. And then these sections are going to need to be split. And then I'm going to need to do the same thing on the back here, which I probably could have done this a lot better, to be honest. A lot of different things that I could have done a little bit better here. I could have mirrored all of this. That probably would have made things easier. And then, especially when we're marking our seams, we could have just marked them on this side and it would have done the same thing there. But that's just part of it. All right, so I need to mark that, all of this. And we've got these individual parts here. And then we're going to need to do at least a seam on each corner here. Something like that. Okay, now let's see what is going on. Let's see where this is. Ah, okay, yeah, we just forgot this back part here. So we need all of this. We'll need this inside part here as well. Okay, and then we'll also need, probably just go ahead and separate all of these as well. I really like to think about, especially with a window like this, you know, this would probably be made of wood, or in our case, we're going to use a wood texture. So you really want to think about which direction you're going to want things to go for your wood, right? All right, what else do I have? Where is that? Okay, so yeah, let's put maybe a seam there and there. There we go. It's starting to look a little bit better now. Now these large areas, yeah, I want to separate at least, well, really all of these. So a seam there. Let's see. So I think I might have some overlapping going on here. Let me just merge everything. We did get rid of 8 vertices there because this should all be separated and it looks like it's not. Oh no, it is now. Okay, maybe that was my problem. Yeah, so I wanted to make sure that this was a separate piece from this piece. And I believe it is now. So that looks good. And this should be separated. Then we have this and this. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's looking a little bit better. I should probably also separate this like that. Okay, so we have just like one piece of wood there, one piece there. That's looking a little bit better. The other thing is, so I probably should either do something like this. Just slide that to where we have that, or if I would want if I'm thinking about this as a piece of wood, if like this would be one piece of wood, then I would need to put a seam here like that, and really even across here as well. And then we could delete these. What I'm thinking about is, yeah, hopefully that makes sense. So like this would be all one piece of wood, essentially. And, on a regular piece of wood, you wouldn't actually have a seam right there because that would be kind of separated. Yeah, okay, so what I'm realizing, guys, is I actually did not a great job at creating this model, and this is why topology is really important, not just for having correct topology to triangulate everything, but when it comes to UV unwrapping, you can run into issues like this, and you can see what we did here. I've got like some weird kind of overlapping here where I've got this long edge, and then I think this may not have even been intentional, but we merged vertices here. And so we had this interior section here that was merged with this. I'm not even really sure why I had interior loops there. So I think what I'm going to do is actually just kind of recreate this. Or maybe I can kind of salvage this, but yeah, we really should have done this a little bit better. And this would make things much easier when it comes to unwrapping this, okay? So let's just fix our problem by doing it the right way instead of trying to make all of this work, all right? So let's duplicate this, and I'm going to push this back. And let's figure out what we want to fix. I think the main thing is this is all kind of messed up. I'm just going to delete all of that. Delete all of those faces. Let's see what I did here. Yeah, because there's really no reason to have all of this. We can actually just, let's see, merge. I should be able to select this entire interior, and I'm not sure why I can't. Oh, I see. Okay, I'm not really sure where these came from. Just dissolve those. I guess these came from our window frame there. But I think that is causing some issues. Okay, so let's dissolve those. Now can I select... There we go. So I can just dissolve that, and I should be able to dissolve all of that. That will make all of that much easier to work with. Okay. And really, I can probably even grab it from this, because what I need is just this interior part here. So I'm going to Shift D to duplicate that, and then just move that right into there. And actually, while we have this separated, you know what? I'm just going to clear. Well, let me go ahead and separate. Let me back up just a little bit. So just that part, I'm going to just separate that by selection. So I have that just as a completely separate thing. And I'm just going to remove all of these seams. Clear seam. And the other thing that I'm going to do, because you can see this is just coming right to the edge. So I'm just going to expand that a little bit on the Y and the Z. So I'm going to do S, Y, and I'm just pushing them just into the mesh there. And then same thing on Z. So just expanding both sides there. Because if it's right on the edge, then you can actually, a lot of times when you bring that into Unreal Engine or another game engine, you'll see the, like you'll get some light leaks and issues like that, okay? And so there's no reason that we can't just push all of that in like that. Okay. While we've got this, let's go ahead and UV this, because this will be, I think, a little bit easier as well. Actually, I'm just going to delete this for right now as well to make this all a little bit easier. So I do still want to do this and this, because I want these to kind of be like separate pieces. And then I want to imagine a seam going all the way down, actually all the way around, I guess. Okay, so like that. Do that over here as well. Okay, so all the way up there. And then we just need to figure out how we want to split these pieces up. So I think, I don't know if this is how I was doing it last time, but I think I want to just have this be all one piece. So same thing over here. Okay, and then really all I need to do with these pieces is just have one seam on the back here. Okay, so I think if I'm thinking about that right, that should work. Oh, I will need, yeah, all of these will need to be cut out as well though. Okay, so yeah, this one really is quite tricky. So I just kind of took a few minutes to just kind of look at this and just think about how I wanted this to be. And to be honest, like I said, we probably could have modeled this a little bit better to make this a little bit easier. I think maybe it would have been better to have these pieces separated and make them maybe a little bit smaller, and maybe even just have like one long piece going all the way through. But, you know, that's one of those things that you live and learn. That's why it's good to do these projects, because you do things like this and you learn how to do things better the next time. But the main thing that I was thinking about is, okay, I want this to look like one piece of wood, right? So that means that I want this to all be one UV island, because if you think about how the grain of wood is going to go, we want it to kind of go long ways all the way down. And then these would be separate pieces of wood, right? So I've got just a single seam on the back here, and then seams all the way around the edges, so that those will just be able to be unwrapped. And again, that just gives us an island that looks like that. So for each one of these, we've got those sections. Not really the most efficient way to do it. Like I said, probably should have just had a single long piece that goes all the way through there, but it'll work. And then we just have seams around the edges to represent another piece of wood for the edge part there. All right, so putting all of that back into this piece, which is fine. We can now just go ahead and join these. So I'll just join those, and then we'll go ahead and do an unwrap. Let me just see, what do we have going on here? Yeah, so this is where we were looking at earlier. If I wanted to have all this separated, to be honest, I don't know if I really want to do it like this. I might just slide these all up like this. And we'll do that over here as well. Okay, and then we'll merge. And then we'll just have these pieces that are separated like that, and that'll be fine. Okay, so let's just check that again. Okay, so I think this will be fine. So this is where something like UV Packmaster is really helpful. If we try to pack this with Blender's pack engine, we can see what it looks like. Not bad, but you can see if I use UV Packmaster, we're going to get something much more efficient. It'll keep kind of churning through this to get the most efficient thing possible. Now, another thing to mention that I didn't talk a lot about, but when we do have something like this, it is really important that we think about direction if we're not going to be using Substance Painter, because we just have a single seamless texture, and we would want things to line up and be in the correct order. So this gets super complicated, and this is a lot to think about. So I'm not going to go super detailed into this because for the most part, I'm going to use Substance Painter. But if you were going to not use Substance Painter and just use a single seamless texture, then you really do want everything to be aligned correctly. And what I mean by that is like this section right here, you want that to be going up and down in the same direction that this is going. Okay, so like this piece, you want that to be the same direction because even though it's turned here, you want the grain to go this way and the grain on this to go that way for wood. I hope that makes sense. So yeah, keep that in mind. There are a lot of times artists will literally hand place UV islands. That can come in handy when you are doing something like this. So yeah, it just depends. If you're using UV Packmaster, you can actually uncheck rotation and then it will pack everything as best as it can. Oops, I didn't actually select everything. But it will pack everything as efficiently as it can there. In this case, we might want to do something where we say like, okay, we don't really need much resolution at all for that. You know, the outside, I'm not really going to see the outside much. I can make that really small. Like this side is going to be really small. So I don't really care much about resolution for that side. I could make those a lot smaller. Try and pack that again. That's looking a lot better. So, you know, this is kind of a back and forth process a lot of times. So yeah, just keep that in mind. All right. I need to add my glass back in here. I'm just going to duplicate that, bring that in there. And now I just need to make sure that all of this is still set correctly. So let me just check, selecting window, that looks good. And then selecting glass. Okay, so I need to reapply. Let's see, why is that now? Oh, I didn't actually, okay, hold on. I need to separate this and I'm just gonna delete all of this. And then we'll go ahead and join this. So join, and now let me check. Okay, there's my glass. And there's my window material that did not get, okay, so it got messed up. So let's do that again. Select everything, uncheck that, and we're gonna assign that to window. Yeah, this is kind of finicky a lot of times. So yeah, just make sure that you got all that set up when you have multiple materials like that. All right, so I think glass, I'll just do a quick unwrap for that, and that will be fine. Okay, so I know that was quite a bit, but that is just the way it goes sometimes. And again, that's where good topology comes into play. And it might be the same issue with this. So I'm going to go ahead and just unwrap this and I'll kind of talk about it after I'm done. Okay, so in this case, I kind of split things apart again just to make it easier to mark my seams. And mostly what I did is I just grabbed everything that was a sharp edge and marked a seam there. And then I added an additional seam here and here, and then just on the inside as well, so I didn't have like this very long section that went all the way around on the outside and the inside. And this is going to be fine for me to have like this because I think this is going to be like a metallic texture here. So really it'll be fine to just leave that all all how it is there. You can see that all of these are separated, but I could have gone through and, you know, left some of these out, but it just made it easier just to do that. And that's going to be fine for me because, again, this is just going to be a metallic texture, so you're not going to notice it too much. So I'm going to go ahead and combine all of this back, just bring that into there, and then we'll just grab that. And then the last one here. Okay. And then I'll just go ahead and do a quick pack on everything there. We could probably optimize this quite a bit more. In fact, we need to also separate this. So this can be unwrapped separately. Okay. And for right now, I'm just going to move that out. And then let me just think about the back side here. So really all of this, all of that, all of that, and this bottom, I can make this much smaller. Okay. And then we'll just do another unwrap. Whoops, sorry, a pack. Okay, still not super great because we have some very large shapes here. Let's see. What is that? Okay, so I'm thinking what we could do is maybe fit some of this inside of things. So I'm going to make this just a little bit smaller. Let me also have that stop scaling at the 3D cursor. So we do that. And then let's see, this outer part, we can make that a little bit bigger. And let's try and pack that. Whoops, didn't mean to pack that. Let me actually just undo. So I want to just do that. It's getting better. I think we can still do better though. So one area that I just see here, I can split this maybe like right there. Let's put a seam like that. This is why I actually don't like live unwrap, because when I am changing, when I have multiple materials and when I'm changing texel density for things, then it messes all that up. So let's see. That can all be small. And then we're going to just try to fit that into there. And then we'll fit all of that into this guy. This piece we could probably split as well. So maybe we do something there and there. Okay, let's just see what that looks like if we pack that. Still have, what is this? That should have been split. Oh, I guess it is split. It just did it kind of a weird way. There we go. That's looking much better. Okay, so I'm going to go with that, and then I will just do a quick unwrap on that. Now I need to assign those materials. I've already created a glass material, so let's just add 2 materials here. And then for this, we can just click on our drop-down box, click on glass, assign, and then Control-I to invert, and select this one. That is going to be our window, assign. And again, let's make sure that we actually did those correctly. And we did, okay. And I think we are good to go on that window. So that was a little bit more work, but mostly it was because of not great modeling or not great topology there. All right, let's do our ceiling here. I think this guy should be pretty easy. So mainly, now this is something, this piece we do want to be seamless, so we need to think about that. But we're going to do one large seam here. And really, that's the only thing that I'm going to see, so that's the main thing that I need to think about. So let me do a unwrap for that. Okay. And then, yeah, so this edge right here is running along this edge, so I need to stretch this out. Oh, let's scale from 2D cursor, so we're right in the corner. And let's get that as perfect as we can. Okay, unfortunately on this, it doesn't look like I can really snap to the edge. There's got to be a way to do that. Maybe not with using default Blender. But if anybody does know a way to instantly fill this, let me know. I'm sure a lot of people would like to know because it is cumbersome to have to use add-ons. And then the other thing that I will do is just do... we might as well just unwrap the rest of this like this. Okay, mark seams for that. Okay, that does not look right. Let's see. Something weird is going on here. I might need to merge vertices. Yep, we had a bunch of vertices somewhere that needed to be merged. So let's try that again. Let's see. I want to only select these and unwrap that. Okay. So that's fine. You can either leave it inside here or you can put it outside or do whatever you want. I'm not going to see those, so I don't care. I just mainly care about that interior part right there. All right, let's do our other ceiling piece. I guess let's make sure that we've got everything merged. Okay, so that looks good. All right, so for this, this might be a little bit different. So if we were to do a seam all the way around here, whoops. So I don't think this is going to work out too well for us. If I just do that, yeah, that's going to be kind of weird. So I think what we're going to need to do is put a seam right down the middle here. And then we'll get something like that. And then if I do this one, whoops, that will give me that. And I think that's going to be okay to be like that because, well, we'll have to look and see, but I think that's going to look all right. And then the rest of this, we can do kind of the same thing here. So all the way around there. Whoop. Okay, so we'll just go around the perimeter. Okay, just put seams there. And then I want to just grab this, that, and that. Unwrap, and that'll be good. Okay. All right, move that to somewhere, doesn't really matter. And now we just have our door. So let's do our door frame first. Okay, so for this, kind of like our window, let's try and kind of break this up a little bit. This can be maybe a little bit different. So I'm going to put a seam there and there. And then for our interior part here, I really just want a seam there and there. Okay, to kind of make that be 3 pieces of wood. And then for this section, I think we can probably get away with doing all of this on the top. Oh, not sharp. Mark seam. And then I think we can probably just go all the way down like this. One more seam there, and then we'll need another one here. Okay, and I think that's going to be okay. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, that's going to look fine. Now, I think that we will try and pack all of this into one UV grid. So that's the door frame, and we'll need to make some things smaller to get everything to fit. So let's go ahead and do the door. Okay, for this is going to be a little bit more to it. So what I might start out with is trying to just use sharp edges to grab everything that's a sharp edge. Go ahead and mark a seam. Let's just go ahead and unwrap that and see what that looks like. Or actually, select everything. Okay, not too bad, but we've got some kind of weird things here. So I think these, which are like these areas, are going to need to have a seam on it. You can see that it started to put them on there. Let's see. Let's do just this. All right, so this is going to be a little time consuming, so I'm just going to go through and do this, and I'll come back when I'm finished. Okay, so I have gone through and mainly just gone and marked these edges as seams there, and everything else I just let the engine just mark by a sharp edge, and that worked out pretty well. I did have to add just a few other, did have to add just a few other seams in some of these areas. I just needed to unwrap this this area right here, and I split that into 2 sections just to make that a little bit easier to work with. And actually, now that I look at it, I probably need to unwrap this as well. Yeah, so let's maybe just do like a seam right there. And then we'll do one on this side as well. This is another reason why it would have been much better to do this when things were mirrored before we applied the mirror. Would have made that a lot easier, but that's all right. Okay, we'll just do one there. And one there. Okay. All right, so that's what we get. That is not too bad. Before we worry too much about texel density and all of that, I'm going to just move that away. And let's do the last thing, which is just this guy right down here. So, let's just center in on just that and figure out what we want to do for this. So for this, I think we can just do something kind of like this. Actually, don't really like that. Let's go like that. Mark seam. And then we'll do maybe one all the way around there. And then maybe some more like... I think this is going to be fine just to do that. I'll let this be stretched out. I'm okay with that because it's going to be such a small area. You're not going to see that very well. Okay, we'll just do the same thing over here. Okay, and we're going to get this, which I am going to want to straighten all of this. So again, I showed you how you can do the follow active quads. I'm just going to use this because it's so much easier. So I'm just going to use ZenUV here to just quadrify these, and that should be good. Okay, now before I pack any of this, let's go ahead and grab everything that we want to do into one, or pack all of this into our UV island here. So we've got everything here. Now, I want to make sure that I go ahead and unwrap everything like this. And actually, now that I said that, I just realized that we're going to have to quadrify these again, which is fine. But yeah, this is where I want to figure out where I can save some texel density. So obviously, like right up here, we're not really going to ever see that. So I can probably make that a little bit smaller. Now, some areas that I will probably want to be a little bit larger are going to be like here, here, maybe the door handles. Okay, we'll get the edges as well. Okay, just a little bit. It doesn't really need to be that much bigger, but because those are going to be, you're going to see those probably in a little bit more detail. I'm just going to make those a little bit larger. And then I can probably make this face maybe a little bit smaller. The edges over here, these are not really going to be very visible. So I'll select those, make those a little smaller. And let's go with that. Let's see what that looks like if we do a quick pack. Okay, now at this point, I might try to optimize this a little bit more. Might say like, okay, we've got some extra area here, so I might try and maybe like make the actual door faces a little larger. This islands down here, this could be reduced, really small. You're never really going to see that. Just think about any other areas, that you can make smaller. I could probably reduce like these a little bit. These don't really need to be super detailed. Okay, so just make that a little smaller. And usually what I do is I just move them outside just so I can kind of see what I'm working with. And then I'll try and just do another pack. All right, that's looking a little bit better. We still have a good amount of open space there. We could even say like, oh, maybe we want to just make our handles quite a bit higher resolution. Oh, I also need to quadrify those again. So let's try and go with something a little bit more like that. And let's also just quadrify these. Okay, I could probably add a little bit more. Try that again. And this is just kind of the process, just going back and forth. You can add a little, take a little away. Just depends. Let's see, that might be too big. Ah, that's not bad. We might want to make these pieces a little bit larger. Might be something that I want to, write on those or something like that. All right, so anyway, I think we'll go with that. That looks pretty good. We could make this a lot better, but just for a quick job, it's not too bad. Some other things in here that we could have straightened and quadrified, but I am fine with that. I know this video is already getting quite long, so we will go with that, and I think that is now it. So, all right, I think that is going to do it for the UV mapping episode. So I know that was a lot. Next, we're going to move on to texturing, which will also be a lot, but I'm going to show you a couple of different processes. Although really, if you're not going to use Substance Painter, you really are ready to go ahead and bring these into Unreal Engine and set up your textures, because we've got everything set up to be seamless, so you should be good for that. But I will still show just the general process of bringing that in, setting up the materials, and then I'm going to do a separate series / set of videos that is just on Substance Painter for setting these up to texture. And so I will have a separate kind of video and or series just on Substance Painter for texturing these for texturing these models. And then I even want to go a little bit further and do like a high to low poly workflow on something maybe like this pillar, where we chip some edges and show how to bake details down onto a low poly model. So there's a lot more coming up. Stay tuned. And as always, thank you guys so much for all of your amazing support. Thank you for checking these videos out. If you haven't already, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. And if you want to support me even further, you can check out the links below to Patreon, the Fab Store, where I sell some different assets. And yeah, until next time, I will see you guys on the next one. All right, take care, guys.